Well, I mean, what did we expect? The United States, in violation of international law, in violation of every norm and standard, in violation of its own principles and values, carried out an attack against Iran, a sovereign state. There is no declaration of war between the United States and Iran. The president did not go to Congress and seek permission for this, and there is no cognizable justification under international law for the American strike. The United States hasn't even tried to make such an effort. So the United States carries out an illegal act of aggression, and you expect Iran, who has warned the United States over and over again, don't do this or we will strike back, to just sit there and take it. So Iran is doing what it promised to do. I'm frankly surprised at the scope and scale of the Iranian response based upon news information. I had thought that maybe they would have done 6 missiles for 6 bombs, but it looks like they're going, a broader scope and scale, which now means that Iran is seeking to act on its promise to drive the United States out of the Middle East. I don't know if they'll be successful in that. I don't know what the American retaliation is. My understanding is Donald Trump's meeting with his national security team right now, and Donald Trump has promised a massive retaliation. So, here we are. America's at war, led by a president who promised not to get us in this kind of war, a president who condemned other presidents for dangerously, leading us down the path of potential aggression with Iran. And now he's doing it. And, we don't know where this is going to end. Is Iran going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz? I saw the president's social media posting, "Don't do it," he said, as if anybody cares anymore what this man thinks. So, enjoy gas while you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Go out and fill up your tanks, because maybe by the end of the day, A, there won't be any gas, and B, the price will be through the roof. We don't know, but this is a very dangerous situation. This isn't fun and games. This isn't a computer game. This is about a president who has taken a nation to war for no reason whatsoever.
So do you think Iran is, so there's two potential scenarios right here. Iran is responding because it has to respond. If it doesn't respond, it seems weak to its population, to the world. That's one argument. The other one is Iran wants to involve the US in a complete all-out war. Where do you think Iran's strategy is heading to at the moment?
Well, first of all, Iran didn't want to respond, because if Iran wanted to respond, Iran would have launched a preemptive strike. The United States indicted itself with the president's own words in the aftermath of the Israeli strike, where he used the royal we. And then he went out and bragged about how the United States and Israel had been planning this all along. So legally speaking, Iran had every right to lash out against America in the region, but it didn't, because it's not looking for a broader fight with the United States. But now it's been given no choice. And the other thing that people need to understand is that there has been a debate raging inside the Iranian government between the hardliners and more moderate elements led by the president and his foreign minister. The hardliners are winning out now. It appears that this attack is a signal that Iran is now committed to action that will cause the United States ultimately to withdraw from the Middle East. I'm not saying they'll be successful, but it appears that Iran has initiated action that would reflect that they have a strategy that is defined by that outcome.
There's reports that 3 impacts have already been reported in the Qatar base of Al Udeid. Would the US respond to this? So do you think that Iran telegraphed those plans in advance for the US preps, similar to what they did during the Soleimani retaliation? Or do you think that was a surprise? Because it doesn't seem it was a surprise. So was it US intelligence that allowed them to know in advance to shut down the airspace and be on alert and put out that alert earlier in the day? I think it was a shelter-in-place alert that was put out for citizens in Qatar. Or was that Iran in advance telling the US, so then the US does not retaliate after this?
A lot of speculation that would have to go into answering that. I don't believe Iran is in the business of causing American casualties. If they were, then this attack would have been done in a different fashion. This is a well-telegraphed attack, as you know, as you've indicated through intelligence reports, etc. And so I think this is an attack that's designed to send a signal to the United States. And maybe Iran is doing this so that they can repeat what happened with the Qasem Soleimani assassination, followed by the Iranian ballistic missile attack against al-Assad, which sort of brought that episode to a close. I think President Trump hopefully is being briefed on what the consequences of an American retaliation would be. First of all, we don't have sufficient forces in the region to do a meaningful retaliation. We could go strike targets, but what targets are we striking? And all this would do is, the Iranians have been preparing for this very conflict for 20 years. They have a plan. We don't. So we'd be playing into their hands. So they would continue to bombard bases with missiles, and we would continue to be punching holes in the ground in Iran. So hopefully the president, and in the meantime, energy security around the world goes through the roof, because Iran will shut down the Strait of Hormuz and perhaps strike oil production facilities in the region if the United States were to strike Iranian oil production facilities. And then now we're looking at a global energy crisis, which will detrimentally impact the United States as well. So I'm hopeful that the president is being briefed that this is a one of American Iranian retaliation, and that if the United States just lets this lie, then it can be considered to be a trade-off. You hit us, we hit you. But the key is casualties. If Iran causes significant American casualties, it'll be impossible for a president not to respond. So let's take a look at the things that have been struck. If the Iranians gave the United States sufficient warning to shelter in place, if the Iranians are striking empty hangar facilities, that might be a signal that they're just making a demonstrative move that they have to make. Let's remind everybody real quick here that the United States sent 6 B-2 bombers over Iran to bomb 3 nuclear facilities that were under full monitoring by the International Atomic Energy Agency up until recently. I think Iran just terminated their relationship with the IAEA. And the United States also fired 30 cruise missiles, and there was no justification for any of these actions. So Iran has every right under international law to retaliate, and I think that's the right that Iran is exercising right now.
No, I agree with you. I think what really matters is the intention. I think from what I see right now, I think America's intention is not to be involved in a long war. I think that would be very unpopular for Trump domestically. We already saw a bit of a split within the MAGA base prior to America's attack. So that would be my guess on the US. And when you look at Iran has avoided hitting American bases until it's being forced to at the moment. So I'd say the same thing about Iran. Iran's been hit hard by Israel, and I'd love to get your take on it in a bit. But Iran does not want to get a new enemy in this war. I think they're struggling as it is against Israel. So hopefully that's right. But as you said, there could be unintended consequences. So unintended outcomes. If Iran does cause severe casualties at the Qatari base, then obviously Trump will have no choice but to respond with a heavy hand, and that could escalate further and further. I want to take a step back towards the Strait of Hormuz. I think this is probably the biggest wild card that we have, because if that gets disrupted or shut down by Iran, that would obviously cripple the Iranian economy, but they've been pushed into a corner that would severely impact the global economy. Now, why I think this is unlikely is because Iran's biggest supporter, which is China, I think they're supporting Iran even more than Russia right now, which is busy in Ukraine. They wouldn't like the Strait of Hormuz closed. They've got I think it's about anywhere from 15 to 30, 40% of their oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So they'll be hit hard. And Russia benefits if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, because Russia's oil prices going up will help Russia. And then China will have to depend on Russia. So considering those circumstances, do you think that Iran could be forced to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, or are we getting closer to an end of the war? The nuclear facilities have been hit. The US bombed them as they needed to be able to destroy them. That we're going to debate that later on. Prime Minister Netanyahu did say that the end of the war could be days away, not only in Iran, but also in Gaza, which could be a big relief, but he said this before. So there's kind of 2 possibilities here. Things that escalate, significant damage to the US base, Strait of Hormuz gets disrupted, or this is it, Iran retaliates and the war slowly winds down.
Well, first of all, we need to understand that Iran has been operating within the 4 corners of international law assiduously. And I think that surprises many people who have been speaking about Iran as a rogue nation, etc. And so when you speak of the shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, Iran would have to have legal justification to do that. For Iran to preemptively shut down the Strait of Hormuz would be a violation of international law. So I think there has to be a cause and effect activity taking place, so that things would have to happen for Iran to shut down the Strait of Hormuz that haven't happened yet. The other thing I think we need to understand is that the Iranians have been engaged in significant diplomacy with both Russia and China, and Pakistan. By the way, I believe in the Security Council today, Russia, China, and Pakistan have put forward a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. That was done with the approval of Iran. And so diplomacy is in the air. The other thing that's curious is that this attack comes after the foreign minister, Araghchi, went to Moscow and met with Vladimir Putin. I can guarantee you the Iranians said, we have to retaliate. And Vladimir Putin apparently did not raise meaningful objections to it. And if we're looking at a potential vector for Iranian intentions to be sent to the United States, we may have to look no further than Russia, meaning that having briefed Putin on the plans, Putin and Araghchi discussed potential outcomes. If the Iranians said, look, we have no choice but to strike back and strike back hard, especially if we're going to dampen the ardor in the IRGC for more military action. There's many in the IRGC that want to go all the way, that say this is the moment. Let's finish this now. We're committed. The president of Iran and his foreign minister aren't cut from that same piece of cloth. So it seems to me that an argument can be made that Iran did telegraph this attack, and that the vector for that might have been Russia. Iran also knows that the Chinese don't want the strait shut. China has come out and said, we're not in favor of this. This is not what we want. This would be very disruptive to the world economy. So there's a chance here, a window of opportunity, that if the United States rides out these attacks and says, okay, tit for tat, we're done with this. Israel today announced to Iran formally that they're ready to stop this war right now. Iran responded back, it is not yet time. Meaning there's more that Iran wants to do.
Yeah, that response surprised me.
It's not surprising to me. Iran is resetting the deterrence standard. When this war ends, Israel will have to understand that it can never again strike Iran, or the response will be disproportionate. Right now, Israel believes that that's sort of a trade-off, that they got rid of a nuclear program. That's debatable, and they can live with that. But from the Iranian perspective, it is Israel had the audacity to attack us, and that can never happen again. Israel has to understand that the price they will pay is overwhelmingly in disfavor of Israel. And I don't know if Iran has made that point yet. So I see the window open for conflict, but I also see if Iran can solve the American conundrum, meaning how do we get out of this without expanding the conflict with the United States, that first close the door with America. Then you can shut down the conflict with Israel, and the world may get able to breathe a sigh of relief, because the worst outcome would be shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, shutting down oil production, and the horrific economic consequences. So, look, we're in a very dangerous period of time, a lot of what ifs and a lot of speculation going on. But if you go off of past behavior, there is a possibility, indeed a probability, that what we're seeing right now is a tragic act of theater, and all sides are looking for an off-ramp out of this conflict, because I don't think anybody benefits from taking this to the next level.
Yeah, an update for you, Scott, is Qatar said there's been no reports of deaths or injuries, so that removes off the table the possibility of unintended consequences from the attack. That's number one. Number two is Iran said they've launched the same number of missiles as the US launched towards exactly the same amount of bombs that the US launched towards the third. I think you read it at the bottom as well. That's the second piece.
Symbolic, yeah.
Exactly. Very, very symbolic. Exactly what you'd expect from a tit-for-tat attack, which shows that it's not escalating. But that kind of is contradicted by Iran's response to Israel's formal request for or at least beginning to discuss an end to the war. So you think Iran would want this war to continue to be able to inflict more damage to Israel to ensure Israel does not attack Iran in the future?
100%. Iran can't afford to stop this conflict now, because then they wouldn't have reset deterrence. Israel needs to basically plead for this war to end. And part of the plea will be, I believe, Israel backing down on zero enrichment and maybe even concessions about Gaza. But this can't be seen as Israel attacking Iran and winning by saying, oh, we destroyed the Iranian nuclear program, which they haven't. They haven't even come close. But the perception creates its own reality. And as long as the minds of the Israeli leadership and the Israeli people that in the long term, this attack was beneficial for Israeli security, then Iran runs the risk of Israel making the decision again to attack. I think what the Iranians want to do is put that marker on the table. You will never attack us again because this is the price you pay. Israel hasn't paid that price yet.
So you think that Israel has not done enough, or Israel and the US have not done enough to kind of essentially destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities?
They haven't destroyed anything at all. They've blown up some empty facilities. All of Iran's enriched uranium is secure and hidden in sites that we don't know where it is. The U.S. admits.
Do you think Israel? Oh wow, really?
Well, the U.S. government has admitted we don't know where Iran's enriched uranium is. All of the centrifuges that Iran needs to step that up to nuclear weapons grade are secure in facilities we don't know anything about. Most of the technology that's sensitive and related to the conversion of uranium hexafluoride into a metal, which is required to make a bomb, is out of that facility, Isfahan facility that was bombed and safeguarded. All of the sensitive production equipment is safeguarded. It didn't get touched. It's all been evacuated. So all we blew up, Israel and the United States, are empty facilities or facilities with equipment that Iran doesn't view as a strategic. For instance, in Natanz, there's large numbers of centrifuge cascades, but these are the IR-1s, the old centrifuge that Iran's going to be replacing out anyways, our IR-2s. Iran doesn't care about them. Iran cares about the IR-6s and the IR-8s. Those have been evacuated. And so they haven't done anything to retard the Iranian program. This Israeli statement that we've pushed the Iranian program back 2 or 3 years is absurd in the extreme, because all Iran has to do is pour concrete, and their nuclear program is right back and running.
No, but do you think Israel, despite their intelligence capabilities that they proved on day one of the war, despite that, despite being able to, having essentially control over Tehran's airspace, they still wouldn't know where those trucks with the enriched uranium went to? Wouldn't it be easy kind of track those trucks and track their destination as well, be able to bomb that as well?
Nothing's easy in the intelligence business. It all requires a lot of hard work and people willing to put their lives on the line, especially with that kind of intelligence. But look, as somebody who spent many years tracking weapons of mass destruction programs that have been broken down into their little components and hidden, it's not as easy as you think. It's a lot of hard work, and it requires boots on the ground. Now, Israel has shown that it has a significant Mossad run intelligence network, so anything's possible. But I think the Iranians have got. If Israel knew where the enriched uranium was, they would have struck it already. They would have bombed it. I guarantee. So the fact that the enriched uranium continues to be safeguarded means Israel hasn't a clue. Now, that doesn't mean that Israel, through its intelligence, can't find out where it is. And I trust you, having worked with Israeli intelligence for 4 years, I can tell you that that's one of their number one priorities. But just because you want to collect something doesn't mean that you automatically get to collect it. And if Israel changes its strategic policy regarding Iran from no enrichment, which means you have to account for all of Iran's uranium hexafluoride, to limited enrichment, 3.75%, and the IAEA re-engages on those terms, then this enriched uranium in excess of 3.75% will be turned over and disposed of. And that's the best path out of here. The best path out of here is one based upon reason and logic that gives Iran its rights under Article 4 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as opposed to this artificial imposition of an Iran-only clause, which is an insult to Iran, makes no sense from a non-proliferation standpoint, and has gotten us to this point where we are today. Nations at war, and the potential of an expansion of the conflict that would destroy the global economy. Is it really worth it?
One more question I see here in the comments. Can Iran close the Strait of Hormuz only focusing on American and American ships and ships of American allies, European ships, or any Israeli ships as well?
I mean, anything's possible. There was a while where the Houthi in Yemen, Ansarallah, was allowing certain ships to go through the Bab el-Mandeb Straits and sinking other ships or attacking other ships. So in theory, this is possible. But then you're not achieving if Iran shuts the Strait of Hormuz, it's to create a energy crisis in the United States and Europe, to punish the people responsible for this situation. And so I mean, it is possible. It's complicated, and it would be difficult to do in a state of full scale conflict. I think if you're going to shut the Strait of Hormuz, it has to be a complete closure. Nothing gets through. But again, it's pure speculation. Anything's possible in war.
Yeah, because that would make more sense. That wouldn't hurt their ally China. That would benefit Russia because oil prices skyrocket, and that would hurt the US, inflation, hurt Europe because a lot of European oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz as well. Yeah, there are reports, by the way, according to the New York Times, that Qatar did inform the US of the attack in advance to minimize casualties, which is what we've discussed earlier, a tit-for-tat attack, more symbolic, and Iran does not want to escalate this into a regional conflict or a war with the US.
Let me just say something real quick about the Strait of Hormuz, if I might. Remember, conflict is a two-way street. If Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz and limits it to just allies of the United States isn't going to take that sitting down. And so there will be American military retaliation on the Iranian assets closing it, which means the Strait of Hormuz is a combat zone, and nobody's going to be going through that combat zone. Lloyd's of London will not allow any of its insured ships to be running through the Strait of Hormuz at a time when the United States is carrying out active military operations against the Iranians in that region. So I just wanted to throw that in there too. I just think it's a pipe dream to talk about limited closure because there will be an American response to reopen the strait.
Could this represent the end of U.S. involvement in this war? Is this it?
First of all, we have a president who is not programmed to run away or retreat. So if this was the end of the war, it's going to have to be couched. It's going to have to be a politicized end, meaning that the United States is going to have to be able to say that they accomplished something through their action. This president will not allow a scenario to evolve that says America got beat. And so, the answer is, we know Trump wants to disengage from the Middle East. We know this with absolute certainty because he has said so. His priority is the Pacific. His priority is China. And the last thing he needs right now is an open-ended conflict with Iran that requires hundreds of thousands of American troops to be committed to possible ground action in Iran. He doesn't need that. He doesn't want that. So I do believe that if this is handled properly, and it's going to require a lot of maturity on the part of everybody involved, and that's a very difficult thing to guarantee, that the United States could, in the aftermath of this, declare that it has achieved stability in the region. For instance, let's say we get a compromised nuclear deal out of Iran that caps at 3.75%. Gets rid of 60% enriched uranium, has American inspectors participating in IAEA inspections. The president can say, we now can rest easy at night. There will never again be an Iranian nuclear program, a nuclear weapons program, and I get all the credit. See, as long as he can say, I get all the credit, I'm the greatest man in the world, my hands are bigger than you, then he will be able to withdraw from the region. But unless he can say that, if this comes out as he got beat or he got outfoxed, then unfortunately, I think this president stays committed to military involvement in the region.
Do you think strategically Iran could position it in a way that allows Trump to get credit for it, but at the expense of Israel? So they continue to strike Israel. They don't strike U.S. targets, which is what we're seeing right now. As soon as the U.S. struck the nuclear facilities, Iran immediately responded. They could have struck U.S. bases immediately. They're ready for it. They've done it before. But they immediately struck Israel. So it seems that Iran wants Israel to pay for this war. And they've been relatively understanding to America's involvement, which means there could be a path for Trump to declare some sort of victory with this.
I think so. Look, the Iranians are far more pragmatic and realistic than many people give them credit to. We sit here and talk about the Iranians as if they're a bunch of raving fanatics and death to America and all this stuff. First of all, it's a total misunderstanding of what death to America means. I mean, put yourself in the Iranian shoes, talk about 1953 and Mossadegh, talk about the Shah, talk about Savak, a CIA-trained secret police, talk about the records that the Iranians found when they took over the embassy, implicating the United States with Savak in the torture and murder of Iranians. And now you understand the genesis of death to America. But I've been to Iran. I was there during Ahmadinejad's regime, which was not known for its pro-American tendencies. And the Iranian people are warm, friendly, they don't hate Americans at all, just the opposite. They want to have good relations with the United States. If once you understand the reality of Iran, the sophistication of the Iranians, everything you just said is possible. These are very sophisticated players when it comes to geopolitics. They're very sharp and keen negotiators who are able to operate on a bunch of different levels at once so that they can achieve what they want to achieve, but give credit where, maybe they don't want to give credit, but they understand the political need to give credit to the United States. Look at how they negotiated. Look at the way that they responded. You remember the letter that Trump sent to Khamenei, and then Khamenei's response. And initially, everyone went, well, there goes negotiations. 6 rounds later, Ali Shamkhani is telling people we're ready to sign a treaty. Because remember, the Iranian argument about nuclear weapons was we have a fatwa. We have a fatwa, and therefore we can't have it. Well, nobody believes the fatwa anymore because the Iranians said it could be overturned in an instant. So the Iranians have come back and said, we're willing to sign a treaty, a binding treaty under international law, registered in the United Nations, a treaty that says we will forever, not have nuclear weapons. And there would be, in that treaty, there would be verification steps. No one saw that up there. The Iranians are willing to do that, willing to cap at 3.75%. Speaking of a multilateral uranium, fuel bank that allows them to use their excessive centrifuge. The Iranians are willing to do all of this, which shows the flexibility and the reality that they approach problem solving. So I'm fully confident that the Iranian government, if given the chance, because remember, they can't back down. We attack them, they have to respond. But if we can bring an end to this retaliatory cycle, the Iranians, I believe, are sophisticated enough to work with the United States and other nations in the region to come up with an acceptable deal that brings an end to this conflict. But a key aspect of that is Israel. Israel started this war with their surprise attack against Iran. And according to the Iranian calculations, Israel must never be allowed to think they can get away with that again. And so that's an important element of all this. How much longer the United States is willing to sit back and let Israel get pounded is another question. But I want to say this to your audience who are saying, well, isn't Iran being pounded? Why aren't the Iranians in danger of collapsing? They've been preparing for this very scenario for 20 plus years. 20 plus years, Iran has been preparing for just this. They are operating on a game plan that they have. They have 57 different military districts, each one of which have been equipped to fight independently of the other for 2 years. And this war just begun. So Iran's ready to ride this thing out. This is the journey to the apocalypse, if that's the direction the United States wants to take it. The Iranians, of course, don't want that end, but they're going to make Israel pay. I don't think Israel gets away from this, starting this war lightly. What the price is, of course, is negotiable. But I don't think the idea of let's just bring this thing to an end because Israel's upset, that doesn't fly anymore. Israel have to pay a price that's acceptable to the Iranians for carrying out the crime of launching a surprise attack against Iran that didn't just attack nuclear facilities, which is sort of a symbol of Iranian sovereignty, but it was also a decapitation strike against very senior leaders, beloved leaders of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Committee. Could you imagine how Americans would feel if overnight we lost the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we lost the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we lost major military commanders, we lost the director of the FBI, and then a week and a half later, people go, forget it. Yeah, let's just bring this thing to an end. You think the Americans would go, yeah, you're right, we're just going to forget about it. The damage done to Iran in terms of their sovereign interests and in terms of just the insult to Iran is incalculable. And so Israel's not going to get off lightly for this.
What about the threat to Ali Khamenei's, the supreme leader's life? So Trump has hinted that he could be struck. Netanyahu has hinted that could be struck. Do you think that could strike him? Is that just psychological warfare to scare him so he does not escalate the war? So he accepts some sort of agreement and ends it early? Or is that a real possibility on the table right now? Because there's also reports that we haven't heard from him for 3 days, and some people are saying that he is in hiding, not speaking through any electronics, fearing for his life.
Well, I mean, wouldn't you fear for your life if the President of the United States indicated that you might have a target on your head? Wouldn't you fear for your life if, as some reports out of Iran are true, his residence and his bunker have been struck by Israel? So I don't think it's a theoretical hit on him. I think Israel has actually tried to kill him. Now you have the President of the United States making the same statement. But again, this literally, it shows the ignorance of people about Iran. As Khamenei said, I'm 90 years old. I'm already dead, and don't mourn my loss. The Assembly of Experts has already picked a successor. And if they kill that person, there's a successor to that. The Islamic Republic isn't one man. It's not a dictatorship. It's a constitutional republic overlaid with a theocracy. It's one that's been around for many decades. It's solidified its the infrastructure inside Iran. It's not going to be done away with overnight. So the notion that you can kill Khamenei and somehow cause the system to collapse is a fallacy. It's a flawed notion. But if you do that, that again changes the dynamic of this conflict. I would say the worst thing in the world you can do is kill a 90-year-old man. If you want regime change in Iran, then make peace with Iran, wait till Khamenei dies, see who they replace him with, and then work with the system to moderate policies, etc. Plus, Iran is a member of BRICS. And BRICS is, it includes Russia, China, India, other nations that the United States has diplomatic relations with. Iran becomes self-moderating by joining BRICS, because BRICS is not, a form of radicalism. It's a form of multilateral pragmatism. And so the best thing you can do is have Iran join BRICS, and through that association, you'll see their policies moderate, because BRICS can't function with an out-of-control radical rogue nation. BRICS will function when everybody plays by the same set of rules. And so, again, if I were advising the President of the United States, I'd say, let's bring this conflict to an end, and let's encourage Iran to join BRICS, and let's work with BRICS to keep Iranian behavior moderated.
Talking about BRICS, what about China and Russia's role in this? So Russia's busy in Ukraine. Russia's, correct me if you disagree, but Russia's historically not been there for Iran. They've supported them, financially in some ways. They've worked a lot together militarily. But in 2024, when Israel struck Iran, Russia didn't support them much. They haven't supplied them with much weapons with the Ukraine war. And it seems that this war in some way benefits Russia because it distracts the US away from Ukraine, and it risks oil prices increasing, which benefits Russia's economy. So does that mean Russia won't be there for Iran if this war continues? And what about China? I think China strategically benefits more if Iran wins this war or ends up in a better place after this war. Iran is a very close ally to China, but also supplies a lot of oil to China, and they've got the Belt and Road Initiative there. Where do these two powerhouses come into this?
Well, to answer that question, I guess I have to throw out sort of a rhetorical question in response, which is, if you're a parent and you have a child that's prone to misbehaving, do you want to deal with that child when the child is relaxed and comfortable in their situation? Or do you want to deal with that child in the midst of a temper tantrum because something's been taken away from that child? And the answer is you want to deal with a relaxed child. The United States is a child on the world today because we're led by a man-child. I mean, just listen to his rhetoric. I know this is getting way political, but this man speaks like no other president. He speaks like no other leader. It's childish in the way he speaks, exaggerations, the whole thing. And so nations treat him like a child. And so they don't want him to be having a temper tantrum when they have to deal with him. So I think what both Russia and China want is for the United States to calm down, and that it's easier to deal with the United States when they are calmed down. But if you're talking about dealing with America in the South Pacific, where it's very tense over Taiwan, and America gets beat in the Middle East or gets involved in a war that makes this man-child angry, now you have a child who's throwing a temper tantrum, and the chance of something good coming out of that diminishes greatly. So I don't think Russia or China is looking for the United States to be defeated or humiliated in this. I think what they want from the United States is predictability. I've been told this by the former ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Antonov. The number one thing Russia wants out of the United States is predictability. Because with predictability, you can formulate policies that can be implemented. If that predictability is attached to a policy that's hostile to Russia, at least it's predictable. If it's attached to a policy that's friendly to Russia, it's predictable. But what the Russians don't want is the United States jumping back between the two, because it's impossible at that point in time to formulate policy not only about U.S.-Russian relations, but about Russia's relationship with the world, which will likewise be affected by America all over the map. So the best way to have predictability for the United States is to bring an end to the conflicts that involve the United States, to bring an end to the Ukrainian conflict, to bring an end to this Israeli-Iranian conflict. But you're not going to do that by surrendering to the United States. Anybody involved in the conflict won't consider conflict termination unless they get what they wanted out of this conflict, especially if you're winning. Right now, Russia's winning. By any definition of the world, Russia's winning the war in Ukraine. So Russia expects certain outcomes. And there's nothing the United States can do right now to reverse that strategic trajectory of a Russian victory. And right now, between Iran and Israel, we haven't shown an ability, neither us nor Israel, to stop the Iranian missile attacks against Israel. The pain will still come. And so it's unrealistic to say, hey, Iran, stop short of your objectives. So I think the goal of Russian and Chinese diplomacy right now is to bring the conflict in the Middle East to as rapid a closure as possible with doing the minimum harm to the United States, so that when America does whatever it's going to do in terms of withdrawal, partial withdrawal, etc., it does it rationally as a calm child, as opposed to irrationally as a child throwing a temper tantrum.
In our last interview, when Iran was responding to Israel's attack, you talked that Iran needs to attack with, a few waves, up to 1,000, if not 2,000 missiles, for this to be a proportionate response or a significant response to show strength. So far, Iran has fired about 550 ballistic missiles and 1,000 drones. I think none of those made it. They've caused damage in Israel. A lot of them have landed, but it hasn't been the attack that you said you would have expected back in our first interview. How does that compare to your expectations? Do you think Iran has been weakened significantly, which is the way I see it? Or do you think this is strategic from Iranian side? Because Israel does claim they've struck over 60%, I think now, or 40, 50, 60%, and that was a few days ago, of missile launches in Iran. And their stockpiles have been depleted. They still have about 1,000, 1,500. There is an argument that Iran is trying to not deplete their stockpiles to be able to prolong this war, and there's kind of a battle between the stockpiles of Israeli anti-missile defense systems and Iranian missiles, kind of competing in who outlasts the other.
Well, first of all, let's talk about the interceptors versus the ballistic missile calculation. Right now, Israel has sufficient interceptors. They fire a whole bunch of them when the Iranian missiles come in, and yet the Iranian missiles penetrate the defenses and strike Israel and do significant damage. So the idea that Iran has to wait until Israel runs out of interceptors until it does the damage it needs is a fallacy. And so I don't even talk about Israel running out of interceptors. The Iranians have run a more sustained conflict, but they're 500 missiles into what I believe will ultimately be a 1,000 missile barrage. It's not all at once, but Iran's not willing to stop this war right now because they haven't done the damage that they believe is necessary to punish Israel. And so we could be looking at another week and a half of conflict where they'll fire that additional 500 missiles. Many of these missiles will be of a more advanced capability than the missiles they fired early on, which were 20-year-old models. These will be the more modern hypersonic maneuvering with separating warheads, multiple warheads, cluster munitions, some of which they've already fired, and they will just rip Israel apart. As I said, let's back this up. I fought in the Gulf War. One of the things that I did was I got involved in the Scud hunting, hunting down Iraqi Scud missiles. And I remember early on in the war receiving the battle damage assessment. And about a week and a half in, the U.S. Air Force said, we've killed 64 Iraqi Scud missile launchers. The Iraqis only had 19. So beware of numbers. Beware of numbers, especially in war. They get exaggerated. Things are being struck that are decoys, that aren't what they think they are, etc. I wouldn't trust the Israeli numbers at all because you're in the middle of a war. There's a lot of, the fog of war exists. And having done battle damage assessment in a combat environment, I can tell you right now that the data isn't perfect. I would also say that the Iranians had prepared for this very conflict. And the notion that Iran would allow a scheme of operations to unfold that within a week and a half has 40 to 60% of their launchers destroyed is absurd in the extreme. The Iranians are some of the best professionals in the world at what they do. They've been planning this for 20 years. So I would be careful in embracing Israeli data because I was part of an American data set that was just 100% wrong across the board about battle damage assessment during the Gulf.
And that you make that same point you made it earlier about the damage. The IAEA said that the nuclear facility had very significant damage. I think they were referring to the Fordow there. There's been satellite images showing craters. Trump claimed there was monumental damage and the Fordow was obliterated. And Israeli officials, surprisingly, Israeli officials are the ones that indicated that Fordow was not destroyed. That's Israeli officials. Why do you think there's that discrepancy between what the US has said, what the IAEA has said, and what Israel said? They said it was severely damaged but not destroyed, and they did suggest that Iran may have moved materials and equipment before the strike, which is what the US, I think, admitted. They don't know where the nuclear, the enriched uranium has been moved to. So 2 questions there. Number one is, why do you think there is that discrepancy between the reports from the US and Israel? And number 2, do you also disagree with the amount of damage that was caused to those facilities, which you kind of hinted at before?
Well, I don't know what was done at Fordo. I don't know how the IAEA knows what was done at Fordo. To the best of my knowledge, they don't have inspectors on the ground. My understanding is that the Iranians sealed off both of the major entrances and exits from Fordo with soil to prevent any weapons from coming inside. So the tunnel is blocked. That's what we bombed. We bombed a blocked tunnel. We didn't bomb because that tunnel then has to penetrate deeply into the center of the mountain where you have ridges overhead, where the actual cascade facilities are, where the cascade halls are. We didn't bomb those. So I don't know what people are talking about when they talk about damage done to Fordo. We won't know until cameras go inside. We don't know. Did the weapon penetrate significantly? Did the blast done create a cascading effect of collapse that collapsed the tunnels? Because if you collapse the tunnels, you've done significant damage. It can be very difficult to get into the facility. But if all you've done is block a tunnel that was already blocked, you've done nothing. Plus, if the facility had been, what's the point? Remember, Fordo was not purpose built. This is something maybe people don't quite understand. Fordo was built in the aftermath of the 2006 threat by Dick Cheney and George W. Bush to bomb Iran. At that time, the Iranians went all around the country and excavated evacuation sites, that is, underground facilities where they could rapidly move high-value equipment and hide it. And Fordo was one of these sites. And the Iranians said, after the threat was made to bomb Natanz, Iran said, we have to safeguard our investment. So they converted Fordo into a nuclear enrichment hall. But it wasn't designed to do that, and it wasn't the only one there. There are scores of Fordos throughout Iran that we don't know anything about. And so we bombed an empty facility, and we know it was empty. When civilian satellite imagery from, what was it, 19 of June shows trucks lined up pulling stuff out, I could guarantee you that our satellite imagery from the United States shows the same thing with even greater detail. So we knew it was an empty site.
Why weren't they struck, though? Why weren't those trucks struck as soon as they were spotted?
That's a question only the President of the United States can answer. Remember,
by Israel, not by the US, by Israel, though. Israel was already involved in Iran on a daily basis.
Reactive response is not as what you think it is. Okay, so I'm planning an attack. It's not as easy as people think. It's planes just don't take off and bomb. You need to gather the intelligence where the radars are, because Iran still has functioning radars, where the anti-aircraft artillery envelopes are, potential air interdiction. All this path has to be in, and then you have to plan your attack route. You have to bring in your electronic countermeasures. You have to have your refuelers. The bottom line is you build this whole strike package with a weapons release, either from a distance or nearer to the target, and you have to plan your exit routes, and all this has to be planned in conjunction with other strikes that are taking place. And so in the middle of this planning, and remember, you're beginning your plan based upon an intelligence picture that can be updated somewhat with new electronic data, but the physical aspect of it, where you're going to bomb, has already been, the targets are picked on the ground. Now, if they come out and they say, no, we need you to shift this over here to bomb this because we saw trucks. Well, when did you see the truck? How many hours ago did you see the trucks? When did the analysts look at it? When did that report make it to officials who said, this is something we may want to attack? And when did it appear before a target here? Who then has to redevelop a strike package, get all the assets rediverted to that. And by the time they launch and get going, the target's gone. It's a mobile target, mobile relocatable target. So it's not as easy as everybody says in this targeting business. It's not like, we saw the truck. It's not movies, guys. oh, we saw the truck redivert this resource that instantly fires a missile into it. If it were only that easy, it's not.
Yeah, I assume so, because Israel was really quick in striking Iranian missile launches. As soon as Iran started launching missiles, Israel was immediately there in the air striking those launches. That's why I assume they'd be able to do the same with the trucks. But obviously, as you said, it's a lot more complex.
But let me just make clarification of that too. You say Israel was there. Let's look at the Iraqi scenario. The Iraqis would not put a Scud launcher in a launch position until they received the all clear signal about air defense. We had F-15Es flying at night that would be 5 to 7 minutes away from the launch site. The Iranians or the Iraqis wouldn't fire a missile if it was 3 to 2 minutes away, because they knew what time it took to evacuate, and they wouldn't bring it in if it could be detected. This is the Iraqis. And we didn't destroy a single launcher. They would fire their launcher, run it to a hide site, cover it with the tarp to reduce the IR signature. Our F-15s would come in, and they couldn't find the target and hit it. And so now I'm to believe that the Iranians, who have been preparing for this very moment, are going to not clear the airspace, not say, oh no, Israeli planes are hovering, they're over here, and they're going to take a valuable asset, put it out there, and let it be launched. I can guarantee you that the vast majority of what the Israelis struck are decoys, sophisticated decoys. The Iraqis did the same thing. They had a decoy unit that put out, realistic-looking decoys. If you remember Durant, the warrant officer that was captured in the Black Hawk Down incident, he flew Black Hawk DAP missions, direct action penetrator missions, and his helicopter famously strafed one of these decoys. They thought it was real. They believed they were killing the real thing. General Schwarzkopf believed they were killing the real thing. It was a decoy. We didn't kill a single Scud launcher, and the Iranians have studied this war. They've studied all capabilities. I am here to tell you right now, take what the Israelis are saying with a grain of salt, just like take what we said during the Gulf War with a grain of salt. If they're killing any launchers, it's a very small number. If you're hitting something, there's the old saying, if it looks too good to be true, it's probably not true. If you're an Israeli aircraft flying over Iran and you come upon a missile launcher, it's probably too good to be true. Now, I'm not saying that they haven't successfully interdicted. I've looked at some of the images that look like there might be a missile ready to be raised to get struck. Then tip of the hat to the Israelis, because that's a very hard thing to do. But this concept where you see this missile launcher just sitting there with a missile in its bed, just sitting there, that's a decoy.
There's been some footage, talking about decoy, there's been some footage, Israeli footage of them striking those launchers. But then a lot of people are saying because there's no secondary explosion, it means it's a decoy. Is that true? Is it as simple as that to tell us something's a decoy?
This is what I told the helicopter pilots. I said, you guys think that's a Scud? And they said, yeah. And I said, let me tell you what, if it was a Scud, you wouldn't be here, because you were launching your strafing mission well within the lethal radius of the fuel exploding. The fact that it didn't blow up means it wasn't a Scud. If you look at these things, what you're seeing is a standard explosion signature from the munition dropped. If you're not seeing a massive secondary explosion, if you're not seeing solid rocket fuel pinwheeling away, it's a decoy.
I want to talk about Israel's strategy now compared to what we saw earlier. So initially when the war started, what Israel said and what everyone assumes is that Israel's goal is to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. Then when I spoke to the spokesperson, I think it was the ambassador at the time, he said and Israel said that officially as well, the operation is to destroy their nuclear facilities, but also their ballistic missile program. So the scope has increased. And there's been talks about a potential regime change. Now, we know that Israel's now bombing different targets. They're no longer bombing the missile launchers and missile stockpiles and nuclear facilities. They bombed the IRGC security offices. So they're expanding their operation, their targets. The clock, the destruction of Israel clock, which is very symbolic, I understand. And they've struck that. They've even struck a prison in Evin, I think it was. What does that say about Israel's strategy today versus a strategy a few days ago? Are they being emboldened by successes they've had initially?
I wouldn't say they're emboldened by the successes. I think they're confronting the failures. Again, let's just break this thing down. What made the Iranian program problematic from the perspective of the Israelis and the United States was the 60% enriched uranium combined with cascades of IR-6, IR-8 high capacity centrifuges, because this allowed the Iranians within a very short period of time to create weapons grade uranium. Israel hasn't touched that. So if your goal was to eliminate Iran's bomb-making capability, you haven't done that. Not only have you not done that, you've created now within Iran people who are saying this is what we must do. So Israel's actually made a much more dangerous situation for it on the nuclear side. And that's a statement of fact, and the Israelis know it. They have made a strategic error. On the ballistic missiles, they've gone after production facilities. But again, the Iranians know, just assuming, because this is what I would have done if I were counter, but they know what their layout looks like. And they know what the world knows. They know that everybody knows that Parchin is a major missile production facility with easily recognizable production halls, etc. The key isn't that piece of what's on the ground. That can be rebuilt. You just got to pour concrete, move dirt, and it's rebuilt. The key is the design. Once you know how to build a hypersonic missile, once you've solved that problem, you can reconstitute that in a heartbeat. And the sensitive equipment that was done doing that, it's hidden in the bottom of mountains we don't even know about. So Israel has failed on this regard, and they have failed to interdict Iran's ballistic missile stockpiles because advanced missiles keep hitting Israel. So now Israel's in the final end game. And that's regime change. That's their last option, because the only way that they can permanently stop Iran's nuclear program and stop Iran's ballistic missile program is to achieve a change in regimes that will agree to voluntarily give up both of these programs. So what Israel's doing right now, I believe, is striking security facilities to diminish the stature of these facilities by striking RGC headquarters. You show the Iranian people that the RGC is not infallible, they're not invincible, they can be bombed. You try and suppress police stations, etc. And next thing you know, you have an uprising. This is what we did. If you remember Operation Desert Fox, the United States ran it against Iraq in December of 1998. We did a very similar strike where we came in and we hit various headquarters under the belief that then we could get a division to move towards Baghdad, take over, get generals who were commanded a division in the south to make a move and come over. It didn't work. When you start bombing a nation, the people don't go against their government. They tend to close in around their government. And today the Iranian people appear to be, and even the Israelis and the Americans acknowledge this, more closely aligned with the theocracy than ever before. So Israel's in its desperate final stage of, if we can achieve regime change, then we can solve these two problems. And because they're not going to be able to achieve regime change, this is why you see the Israelis picking up the phone saying, we got to bring this thing to an end. Okay, it's over. We got to stop this thing now, because they're getting hit hard. And it's going to be let's see what happens to Israel when this war ends. How many Israelis stay in Israel? Because that's it's problematic. People don't want to spend their lives, raise their family, knowing that at any minute waves of Iranian missiles can come in and cause havoc. And so Israel's got to be really careful not to hit one of these existential tipping points, which is demographic flow out of the country. And so Israel, and I believe the Israeli politicians, this is why they shut the borders. They're not letting anybody out. And the reason why is they don't want to create panic. And because if you open the borders and people start fleeing, panic becomes addictive and contagious, and off they go. So the Israelis want to end this war. They want to bring in a sense of stability. Then they're going to, lift the restrictions. But how can they rebuild? What is necessary to rebuild? Can they afford to rebuild? Because every day that this goes by, the Iranians are destroying infrastructure that's extraordinarily expensive to replace. They just hit the Ashdod power generation, and that's problematic for Israel.
By the way, if you look at the news at the bottom, Scott, just think about it, how we've sleepwalked into this. This has essentially become a regional war. I know it's not a full-blown war where other countries are involved, but UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait have closed their airspace. Bahrain was just hit. No, Qatar was just hit. Iran and Israel are in a direct war. Lebanon was just got out of a war with Hezbollah and Israel, and obviously there's still war in Gaza. This has become a regional war. What's the risks of this escalating further and becoming an overdrawn, long-term conflict involving potentially other nations? Because in our early discussion, we're talking about how the likelihood that the U.S. wants to declare a win. They don't want boots on the ground. They don't want to be dragged into a war. It's not a good look for Trump and his administration. Israel, you said, wants an end to the war because they're being hit hard. Iran, they do want to, deter Israel from future attacks by striking them hard, but they also can't sustain this forever. They've lost significant commanders and infrastructure as well, and they're worried about a potential regime change and Khamenei being assassinated. China doesn't want a war. Russia could probably be the only country that benefits from this. Europe doesn't want a war. So what do you think is the risk of this actually escalating, despite most parties involved not wanting it to escalate?
I would just from my perspective, correct too. The foundational assumptions made. Iran's not afraid of regime change. That's a Western perception. Iran doesn't fear regime change. And Iran's not running out of anything. I don't know how to emphasize this enough. In 2006, Dick Cheney and George W. Bush were planning an attack on Iran at that time. It was planned for the month of March. I think there was a holiday, the Nowruz festival, 10-day holiday. The Iranians shut it down and they closed everything. They were ready to fight. At that time, they broke Iran into 57 different self-sustaining military districts because they believed it was a ground invasion, that the U.S. would seek regime change. And so they built a design that was intended to have Iran survive regime change. Each one of these 57 military districts has been equipped and sustained for 2 years of fighting. 2 years. The Iranians can ride this thing out for 2 years. And if anybody doesn't believe that, just watch them. Israel is not doing any damage to Iran strategically, none whatsoever. You don't see any panic on the side of the Iranians. No panic at all because they have prepared for this. Israel hasn't prepared for what's happening to it. That's the difference. So I think it's wrong to assume that Iran is somehow in a panic state, worried about any. They're not worried about any. They would like to get out of this and get on with their business. But if look at the lack of hesitation to strike American bases. If Iran was scared, they wouldn't be acting this decisively. They're willing to go the distance. How many other nations are willing to go to that same distance? And there's the danger, because what happens if the United States gets dragged into a conflict with Iran? First of all, if we operate under the misconception that the Iranians fear regime change and fear running out of assets, we could get involved in an air campaign of limited duration that doesn't succeed in its objectives. And at the end of the day now, we've exhausted our ability regionally to strike. Iran continues to hit our bases, pulling us back. And now we have to mobilize troops. I don't know what the war plan is today for Iran. I know what the war plan was back in 1985 because I helped write the intelligence annex to it. Hundreds of thousands of troops, forcible entry in the ports of Chabahar, Bandar Abbas, airport seizure, all that thing. Hundreds of thousands of troops that we don't have right now. So we'd have to mobilize, train, and then move them in and carry about forcible entry into Iran in contested space. This is a years-long endeavor. And
do you think
when this plan was briefed to Trump back after the global hawk was shot down, they told Trump at that time, there's no guarantee that we win this one, meaning that even if we do all this and send the forces in, we still may be beat because the Iranians have prepared for this. So the danger here is that the United States, operating off of misperceptions, overcommits. And the real risk here is, if you remember early on when people talked about Fordo and the fact that U.S. conventional weapons wouldn't be able to take it out, the White House released a piece of information with non-attribution, but it was linked to the White House, a White House source, that Trump is considering the use of a tactical nuclear weapon against Fordo. Do you remember seeing that piece of report? It was there from the White House. They didn't because they came in with 6 or 12. I forget how many. I think it was 12 massive ordnance they dropped out. But the thing is, what that shows is that when the United States runs out of conventional resources, we're not going to admit defeat. And then if we escalate, there's the potential of nuclear weapons being used. And that changes the game tremendously. So you're 100% correct. This conflict could spin out of control and take on proportions that are unimaginable at this moment. The collapse of the global economy, the introduction of nuclear war, which then could resonate, throughout the region and around the world. So anybody who treats this as a game, sort of a video game, this is sort of cool, America's dropping bombs on Iran, oh, look, missiles in the sky. Guys, we're talking about potential end of the world kind of stuff here. So I think it's in everybody's interest to see this conflict come to as rapid an end as possible.
Would you say except China and Russia? China, anything to distract their rival, their enemy, the US, is beneficial for those two countries? Spreading the US thin would allow Russia to keep taking Ukrainian territory and could allow China to further prepare for potentially taking Taiwan. Do you think those two countries could support Iran enough so Iran continues this war for longer and potentially try to drag the US in, strategically benefiting them?
Nah. First of all, China doesn't think in those terms. China thinks in terms of global supply chain, economic dominance, and any businessman will tell you that the key to business success is stability. Businesses don't thrive in unstable environments. Stability is the key. So the Chinese want stability. The fact of the matter is China could take Taiwan anytime they wanted to take Taiwan. They could take it today. There's nothing that we can do to stop them. But China's not looking for a military solution. They're looking for a longer term, peaceful integration of Taiwan. And so they're not. Russia's going to do what it's going to do in Ukraine no matter what we do, because we've already thrown the kitchen sink into the fight. And unless we're willing to get directly involved with what troops, by the way, so Russia's not sitting there going, oh, if we do this, we might have an advantage in Ukraine. They already have the advantage in Ukraine. Russia already has a war plan for Ukraine. They're winning this war. Ukraine's losing. Look at the dysfunction in NATO. Look at what happened in the G7. Zelensky's on the outs. Russia doesn't need Iran to do anything to help its position in Ukraine. In fact, it's a complication, because what Russia really needs in Ukraine is for America to get on the side of ending this war by letting Ukraine know that there won't be a lifeline. But right now, it's very difficult for Russia and the United States to have a dialogue because of what's going on in the Middle East. So I believe Russia wants this. Plus, remember, Russia isn't a nation that projects military power like the United States does. That's not how they operate. When it comes to Iran, Russia's number one objective is to secure the north-south economic corridor from St. Petersburg to Tehran. That's a game changer for them. Bypasses the Suez Canal, shortens the length of the trade routes. It gives it access to warm water ports. And this can't happen if there's a state of war. China just opened up the new Silk Road, bringing in trains out of Western China into Tehran. None of this functions when there's war, instability, dysfunction. So I don't think Russia and China are sitting there plotting behind the scenes to keep this thing going. I think both of them are desperate to see this war come to an end, because that brings about the stability they need to focus on their priority, which is BRICS, a Eurasian Economic Union, strengthening of Chinese control of global supply lines, diversification of the Russian economy. None of this happens as long as there's this conflict taking place between Israel and Iran, and now particularly the United States and Iran.
And another thing we discussed in our last interview is Hezbollah. Hezbollah refrained from joining this war, which was a surprise to me, and I think it was a surprise to you as well. They still haven't joined the war. What does that mean for Lebanon? I asked the same question to the ambassador, to the Israeli ambassador. I haven't been able to speak to any Lebanese politicians yet. I would love to get their take when things calm down. But a lot of people in Lebanon are talking about, and are starting to become more vocal about some sort of normalization of relations between Lebanon and Israel. I know it's too early for that, but at least those discussions are being made in the open now. And what does that mean for Hezbollah? Could we see Hezbollah give up their weapons?
Again, this is anecdotal, and I always hate to go off of anecdotal information, but as you've pointed out, it's very difficult to get to speak to primary sources. I communicate via WhatsApp with several families in Beirut, one in particular, and they say everything's calm right now. I mean, they're very nervous about this, but this is a good calm, meaning that the people of Lebanon enjoy not being the center of the volatility. A couple of days ago, there were reports about Israel bombing sites in southern Lebanon because they observed Hezbollah attempting to come back and reactivate some of their evacuated missile sites. A statement from Hezbollah made maybe a week ago said that they are not neutral in this conflict and that they could become involved. So I think from the Israeli perspective, if you can bring an end to this Israeli-Iranian conflict that brings about a resolution of the Gaza problem simultaneously, because there's some talk about that as well, you take away any justification of Hezbollah continuing to posture as a resistance movement. And then Hezbollah reverts to a political party and turns in its weapons. So I think ultimately the goal of Lebanon is to get Hezbollah to give up its weapons, to conform with United Nations Security Council resolutions, and for Lebanon to become part of become a regional neighbor in good standing. But understand they're surrounded by Israel on one side, Syria with the new Syrian government on the other, and then Turkey and what's going on. So Lebanon's not going to be a center of volatility. Lebanon's going to be a nation where compromises are going to have to be made so they can peacefully coexist with such a diverse range of neighbors.
There could be a utopian outcome out of this. If the war ends and Iran is weakened, which I think you disagree with that assumption, but if Iran is weakened, that means their proxies will no longer target Israel. There'll be some sort of uneasy peace between the two countries, and that could lead to, potentially more peace in the Middle East. We don't have that battle, that struggle between not only Iran and Israel, but also Iran and their neighbor Saudi. Is that a possibility? Could that be a positive outcome from all this?
I thought we had that positive outcome a year or so ago when China brokered a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran to achieve just that outcome, to reduce pressures, reduce tensions. So that possibility was already on the table. It's the United States and Israel that opted out of that. You don't need to defeat Iran to get to that outcome. Iran at full strength was ready to move in that direction and had moved in that direction. And had the United States finalized a deal with Iran on its nuclear program, I think we would be seeing peaceful coexistence. The United Arab Emirates is ready to have good trade relations with Iran. So is the rest of the Gulf. Many of them do have good trade relations. They just take place under the shadow with dhows going back and forth across the. Go to Abu Dhabi someday and go down, walk along the port, and take a look at the dhows that are parked there. They all come from Iran. So we don't need to defeat Iran to achieve. It could be defeating Iran. I'm not saying it's impossible. Anything's possible. Iran's not a undefeatable nation, but it would take a lot of resources, a lot of time, into a lot of destruction. Iran's not going to go gently into that good night. The idea that you defeat Iran without bringing down the entire neighborhood is a pipe dream. So rather than seeking the defeat of Iran, I think people should be talking about learning to live in peace with Iran.
Yeah, I am. What surprised me is your stance on the possibility of a regime change. Iranian regime is, based on many polls, is very unpopular in Iran. I think about 80% of people would like to see a new government in place, a democratically elected government that's not looking for the destruction of a neighboring country. Why do you think that's such an unlikely scenario? And by the way, I'm not for a regime change because I know that they just don't work. They've historically been just a disaster time and time again. So I know that even if a regime is not good, and we could disagree with a lot of things that they do, they could still, Libya's one of many examples, they could still be better than just complete chaos that we have now in Syria, Libya, Iraq.
In September of 2003, former Iranian President Raisi traveled to the United Nations to participate in the United Nations General Debate. And myself and several other American journalists and academics were invited to a closed meeting with the president. He surprised everybody, at least he surprised me, by starting off with a lengthy monologue talking about what had just happened in Iran over the course of the summer of 2023. If you remember, there was the tragedy of the Kurdish girl who had been arrested on a hijab violation, gone to a police station, and died under circumstances that, some say no police involvement, others blame the police. But the bottom line is the government was blamed, and there were widespread demonstrations. At that time, it appears that foreign intelligence services who have been working with various groups inside Iran, the ones you could say represent the fracture of society, the Kurds in the north, Azeri separatist movements, the Ahvaz Arabs, the Baluch, the natural Shah versus revolutionary forces that still exist, the Mujahideen al-Khalq, the monarchists. All of these forces mobilized simultaneously to carry out attacks to bring down the regime. And we were aware of it. Everybody saw it unfold on TV. We saw the police stations burning. We saw the police suppressing demonstrations, the whole thing. But what Raisi said was fascinating, because he said this was the greatest threat to the Islamic Republic since the revolution, since the Iran-Iraq war. That what happened in the summer of 2023 almost brought Iran to its knees. He said it was a great struggle, but the revolutionary forces in Iran were able to come together. And here's the important thing, and win the trust of the people. And once they won the trust of the people, they were able to suppress all of this. So the notion that Iran is broken or fundamentally broken, was disproved. in the summer of 2023, when the people rallied around the government, when faced with the possibility of societal collapse, political collapse, they rallied around the government. And then if we take a look at the situation today, we don't see major unraveling as this attack takes place. We don't see that happening. In fact, we see the opposite. We see anecdotal evidence to the opposite, where women without hijabs, again, I don't trust too much what I see on the internet because it can all be fabrication. But, we see them speaking out. But what we don't see is what we saw in the summer of 2023. We don't see the Baluch moving up. We don't see the Afghaz Arabs coming in. We hear a lot of talk from the son of the former Shah, but doesn't resonate with any action on the ground. And most intelligence services say that the regime is more secure today than they have been at any time because the people have rallied around Iran, and they're not willing to work with foreign powers to bring down Iran, bring harm to the Iranian people. So I don't think regime change is in the books at this state of the game.
Yeah, I think if it becomes an objective, it will be disastrous for Iran in the region. And another point, like in 2023, Israel wasn't bombing Iran. So I think we should have to take into consideration that Iran is being bombed by an enemy. When there's an enemy bombing your country, people tend to put their differences aside and rally around the government that's in power at the time. So I think Israel's war on Iran could backfire if Israel's looking for a regime change. That's one way of looking at it. Obviously, time will tell.
But the real risk, here I am, I shouldn't be saying this. Right now, I think Iran is immune to regime change. The real risk comes once peace breaks out and the scope and scale of the damage done to Iran becomes apparent. And if the regime doesn't have a plan on how to move forward, and this is where peace becomes important, because the sustainment of sanctions against Iran would be devastating to Iran in a post-conflict environment. So I think one of the things that Iran is looking for by continuing its struggle against Israel is to get concessions on the lifting of sanctions and to get Russia and China and India and everybody else to agree to immediate economic engagement so that the rebuilding of Iran can happen almost immediately. But if Iran runs into a situation where it's stagnant for 3 to 5 years afterwards because of the continuation of sanctions, et cetera, then you can see the fractures reemerge. And dissatisfaction in the government come in, not because of what they did in the war, but how they handled the peace.
Another country that I want to ask you about is Israel. How do you think Israel will come out of this? Because we're seeing a lot of support for Netanyahu's party after this war. So he's being, hailed as a hero by some, which is very, different to what we saw after October 7th and the security failures that we saw back then. So if you're making the argument that this war supports the regime and their popularity domestically, and we're seeing the same thing happen in Israel, wouldn't that highlight that both countries are benefiting from this war when it comes to politics?
Well, perception creates its own reality. I've said that several times. Right now, Israel is operating under the perception that it's winning, that it has severely degraded. I mean, the official pronouncement from the Israeli government is we have set the Iranian nuclear program back 2 to 4 years. That's a victory. That's a victory from the posture they claimed Iran was, where they were days or weeks away from having a nuclear weapon. Now to say because of our strike, Iran is 2 to 4 years away, that's a victory. To say that we have destroyed Iran's ballistic missile production infrastructure, that's a victory. But I don't believe any of these statements can be sustained by fact. And I'm convinced that once the missiles stop flying, the bombs stop dropping, and the Israeli people reflect back on the price they've paid and what is the real outcome, I think Netanyahu is going to be in a lot of political heat because this was an unnecessary war. This is a war that didn't need to be fought. And when it becomes clear about the potential of success of the American negotiations with the Iranians, especially if at the end of the day, part of the conflict termination deal is Iran gets 3.75% enrichment, then as an Israeli, you have to ask, why did we do this? If the outcome was 3.75% enrichment, and that was on the negotiating table between Iran and the United States, then why did we do all this? Why did we suffer this pain? And there you suddenly will find that Netanyahu's popularity will plummet.
Yeah, I think peace could lead to fracturing or could kind of lay bare to a lot of the decisions made by all parties involved. In this case, Israel is the one that declared the war. We saw that in Lebanon as well. When things eased up, we saw Hezbollah lose a lot of support after the destruction that Lebanon went through. And I think we could see potentially the same thing in Iran. Like a lot of people in Iran would look at the regime and say, look, you guys wanted death for Israel. You guys looked at leveraging those proxies to support Palestine, which could be a very, from an ethical perspective, a great cause. But for our country, did not do any good. So we could see, and you might disagree, but we could see the same thing in Iran that happened in Lebanon. And that could lead to, moving away from Israel, no foreign interference, a movement within Iran against the regime. I think you disagree with that point, but it is a possibility once people see what Iran led to.
Politics is so difficult to predict. Anything's possible. When you say I disagree with it, just because, the way I look at the picture right now, I would put priority on different things, and so I wouldn't come naturally to that outcome. But I'll be the first one to say that nothing is guaranteed. Nothing's carved in stone. And what we don't know, because we are sniping at this long range, all right? We're not on the ground. We don't have the finger on the pulse. And unless you do, you don't have the real picture of what's going on. The real picture might be the exact opposite of what you're saying, or the real picture might actually reinforce what you're saying and magnify it. We just don't know because we're not on the ground. And we are in a time of war where truth is going through so many filters that, it's hard to determine what the truth is, what accurate is, and all that stuff. They talk about the fog of war, and we are in the middle of the fog of war. So it's not that I would disagree. I actually welcome your statement because I think it's important that when we're talking to people about range of options, that we put out all possibilities. Nothing should be dismissed at this point in time because we are in a very volatile, fluid situation.
And Scott, one last question. By the way, the New York Times just put out a few minutes ago that Trump is not looking at retaliating against Iran's attack on the base. So that goes to the first point we said early on, that the US will likely not want to be dragged into this, and Iran likely does not want to drag the US into this, as they've said time and time again. So that's at least a piece of positive news here in the midst of the fog. One last question: what does that mean for Gaza? Because it's easy to debate what's happening in Iran and make an argument on why Israel needed to strike Iran, and make an argument on why that was not necessary, and there were peaceful ways of reaching the same outcome. The same thing could have had, same debate could have been had about on Lebanon. We had about Lebanon. Hezbollah struck Israel first. Did Israel have the right to respond? October 7th, we said the same thing about Gaza. Israel, right to defend itself, entering Gaza, declaring war on Hamas. But that was ongoing, and there's nothing left in Gaza. Like, I'm in a position now where it's just heartbreaking, and it's something I'm not even able to debate with anyone on whether this war should end. I've taken the stance that the war should end. Could we finally see an end to the war in Gaza? Could we see that Israel's achieved its goals, or at least created the perception in your eyes that they've achieved those goals? They've weakened Hezbollah, or destroyed a lot of their capabilities, potentially leading to the disarmament of Hezbollah. They've weakened Iran, at least in some people's perception. I know that's not yours. But they have weakened, but maybe not to a certain extent, not as much as others would think. And they've weakened the Houthis to a certain extent. And Syria, the Assad regime, is gone. So could we be at a position where Israel's achieved all of its objective, weakened all of its enemies, and could finally start winding down all these wars? Well, the only ones left are the ones in Iran and Gaza.
I agree with the outcome, and I know how it would be spun inside Israel, but I think we can get to that outcome without conceding that Israel's won too much. First of all, let's understand that Gaza is a nightmare. It's just a 100% nightmare for Israel and the Palestinians and the world. It's just a political, humanitarian nightmare, and it's a problem that has to come to an end. But Israel is loath to concede anything on Gaza as long as Iran is over the horizon, because they see a linkage between Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, Yemen, Iran. So I think we might see Trump. I get in trouble when I talk like this because then people say, "Oh, you're so pro-Trump." I'm not. I think you heard me earlier. I'm not a big fan of the guy.
You were very critical of Trump in today's interview.
Yeah, but you got to give credit where credit is due, if indeed he deserves credit. There is an opportunity here for a grand bargain where Iran can get what it wants, which is the United States telling Israel, never again do you get to do this. Iran gets a nuclear deal that caps at 3.75% with heavy monitoring. Yemen, because you bring it into the conflict in Gaza, Yemen withdraws and is no longer firing missiles or interdicting shipment. And we already talked about Lebanon, and the fact is we have a path for disengagement of Hezbollah. So from Israel's perspective, there's the possibility of a grand bargain that resolves all of its conflicts simultaneously and allows Israel to get on the business of rebuilding. And if Trump has a brain in his head, and he is a businessman, so, and he has spoken in terms of grand bargains in the past, many of the obstacles that would have prevented such a grand bargain have been just shattered. I mean, my God, a year ago, if you were talking about anybody bombing Iranian nuclear facilities, you were saying automatic global catastrophe, all this kind of stuff. Okay, so we've shattered that.
World War III.
Yeah. If the Iranians attacked an American base, it's over. America retaliates. Boom. That's been shattered. We have shattered every single one of these obstacles, broken it down, and we're still moving forward, surviving. And I think, again, Trump's tweet today was when I first read it, my knee-jerk reaction oftentimes when I read Trump's social media posts is to be very negative. But then my wife tells me to take a deep breath and sit back and think objectively. He sent a signal to everybody. I don't want oil prices going. And that means that he's looking for an out. He can't say it, but he's saying, I don't want oil prices going up. I am watching you. Okay, so what did the Iranians not do? Shut down Strait of Hormuz? They didn't attack oil fields. They simply sent 6 missiles to respond to 6 bombers. And now Trump's saying the right thing. We're done. We're done. There is the opportunity for a grand bargain to be had here, whether the United States is capable of pulling it off. But I will also say this, Vladimir Putin, who's, I don't know what your opinion of him is. I've never met the guy. I have a lot of respect for this man. I respect his maturity, his pragmatism, his rationality. And he has indicated to the United States and to Iran that he is ready and willing to be a conduit of diplomacy. And so I think that, look, the fact that the Iranian foreign minister went to Russia and after that they sent 6 missiles in means that I believe the deal's already out there. I think behind the scenes, the deal is being made as we speak, because that shows a level of, not complicity is the wrong word, but connectivity. Russia isn't going to sit there and say, oh yeah, hell, attack American bases, bring about American retaliation, the whole world will go to hell. Russia doesn't operate that way. Russia is about keeping things as calm as possible. And so for them to be in a briefing with the foreign minister means that Iran gave their plans and the Russians went, all right, but you need to do this, and we're going to make some phone calls, and we're going to call Xi in China, and and this thing is going to come on down. Let's see what happens. I don't know if the Russian, Chinese, Pakistani resolution was submitted to the United Nations yet at the Security Council, but let's see when it comes in, an unconditional ceasefire. Let's see how America responds, because now that Trump says, I'm not going to retaliate, that's what he needs. That's the cover he needs right now. And so if they submit this, the United States says, yes, we vote in favor of an unconditional ceasefire. Now you have a United Nations Security Council resolution backed by the P5, and Israel's going to go, we're ready. And Russia's going to go, that's your cue, Iran. And Iran's going to go, we're ready. And now we got the beginning of a grand bargain. So, man, we're way too optimistic here. But
I agree with you. I think this is the most likely outcome. I tend to be an optimistic person. I never thought we'd be here in the first place. But I think your analysis right now is spot on. I think this is what will happen. I think Trump does not want a war in the Middle East. I know a lot of people are criticizing him for his decision to bomb Iran, which I don't think was the best decision. But I also would see it from another perspective. Like, I understand why you would want to bomb those nuclear facilities. But my position is that Trump does not want to enter this war. And this is an opportunity for the East, and China just told Iran very publicly, the foreign ministry told in their meeting today, they told Iran, we do not want you to escalate this. I think Russia's saying the same thing. So I think, I agree with you. I think we would see in the midst where everyone thinks that the world's coming to an end, everyone's freaking out. I think we're nearing an end to the war. Fingers crossed, and I hope we won't be speaking again, at least not about
let me just, can I say this?
Please.
This has been fascinating. Because what you and I have done in real time is start with tragedy. I mean, as we speak, missiles are flying. We have no idea. And then by just walking through the problem rationally, we don't agree on everything, but walking through this problem rationally and just bouncing ideas off each other. You know, the funny thing is we reached a conclusion before the ticker tape put it down across the table. So I would say that what we just did is an amazing bit of journalism. So I want to congratulate you for putting this on.
Thank you.
I think you did whatever audience you have. I have no idea how many people are watching, but you did a great service. You did a great service to them and to the world, because people now can leave this program with a ray of hope, but it's not misplaced hope, because we walked them through the process. We went through every angle. And I just want to congratulate you for putting on a program that actually contributes to the betterment of society through the accumulation of knowledge and information. So congratulations on this.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate your time. And hopefully we won't be having another live stream on the Middle East. We'll be talking about a peace deal being signed, and we'll move on to Ukraine and hopefully never Taiwan. But I appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll be speaking again under different circumstances.
Okay, thanks.